Welcome to Wine Time Mysteries, where we talk about true crime, the paranormal, mysteries, and cryptozoology with a dash of comedy. This podcast contains adult themes and is intended for mature audiences only. Don't forget to click follow and tickle that little notification bell. Now, find a comfy spot. We're about to start today's episode. Good evening.
Good evening, dear listeners.
Fuck. Can you stop fucking fucking me, please?
Just want a little love.
The ding dong.
Ding dong.
The ding ding dong. In full disclosure, today's case will be a little bit of a speed run. While there is a lot of information to cover, it becomes quite complicated, so I figured that I would either have to shorten it while still providing as much information as possible, or go into full detail and have a 3 or 4 part episode. We all know that I am lazy AF, so I am not going to be doing that. Today, we talk about Dean Arnold Corll.
Corll? Oh, I don't know this one.
You do, Dean Corll. I found a way to uncomplicate it. Because since then, I've learned how to write these things, so it's easier now. Dean was born in Fort Wayne, Indiana on the 24th of December, 1939. Capricorn. Oh. Ooh.
Actually bringing in all the input. Gas.
You're a vibe. His parents were Arnold Corll and Corll. And I say Corll a lot in this episode too. And Mary Robinson. Yeah. They would have one other son together after Dean, separating 4 years later. Dean was pretty intense as a child and would also be described of as shy. He would seldom socialize with his peers, though he would display concern for the well-being of others, which is kind of weird, if you ask me. Because most of the murderers don't.
Yeah.
They don't give a fuck, but apparently he did. He did have some issues with his health and had rheumatic fever when he was around 7, a disease that can result from inadequately treated strep throat or scarlet fever. It causes inflammation, especially of the heart, blood vessels, and joints. A heart murmur. A heart murmur was discovered in 1950, and he was told to avoid physical education at school. I wish I was told by the doctor, he can't do it. Still would have ended up fat, it's fine. His parents would remarry to each other and then move to Pasadena, but that would soon be over and they would divorce again. His mother would remarry, but this time it was to a traveling clock salesman, Jake West.
Oh, I like that name. Mr. West.
Jake West, the best. Like John West?
Yeah.
Maybe they're related. They relocated to Vidor, Texas, where the newlyweds would start a small candy company run out of their garage, and it wasn't long until Dean was roped into helping them after school and into the early hours of the morning. He was still a loner in his teens, and his only major interest was in the high school brass band. He played the trombone. In more ways than one. His parents moved again, I believe to Houston this time, to open an actual candy store that they named Pecan Prince, and Dean stayed with his grandparents in Indiana for about 2 years while this all happened. Dean later moved to Houston in 1962 to help them with their family candy business, and later moved into the apartment above the shop. Prime real estate.
I want to live above a candy store.
I'm sure you do.
Candy.
Candy is for the candy. Corll's mother. I feel so dumb saying that name. I should have named him Dean. Too late. Corll's mother said poo-poo to Jake West in 1963 and appointed Dean as the vice president of the candy company. That same year, one of the teenage staff members complained to Mary, the mother, that her son had been making sexual advances against him. Listen, Mama, I think it's time to make sure staff are aware of a little odd thing called sexual harassment in the workplace, and that it's not okay. Mind you, this was also back in the 60s, so I guess it was only frowned upon at the time. Well, Mary is not a layabout kind of woman. Mary took things into her own fucking hands, and she fired him.
Oh.
Not her son, the one that accused her son of sexual
I
harassment.
was like, you go. No.
Not at all. Yeah.
Oh.
Your son's sexually harassing me. You're fired. What? How confusing would that have been? I don't really... They said teenager, but I don't know how old.
Yeah.
But I'm going to assume 15, 16 or something. August 10th of 1964, now age 25, Corll was drafted into the United States Army, but he hated the military and he applied for discharge on the grounds that he was needed for his family business, and the Army actually granted this, which to me was kind of weird.
I need to go work at the candy store, okay?
The candy!
I got to sell the candy.
Won't anybody think about the candy? So the Army granted his request and he was given an honourable military discharge on June 11th, 1965. He only served about 10 months. Once he got back home, he started back at his family candy company as vice president, and the shop was relocated across from an elementary school. Foreshadowing. Dun 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 dun. What is that? Law and Order sound? Ding ding! that noise. Okay.
Yeah.
Corll was super nice to the local children and would even give out free candy, focusing his affection toward younger boys, and installed a pool table near the rear of the store where the employees and local youth could congregate, all hang out together. Because he's just there for the community. Turns out people would often see him being particularly flirtatious with the male customers and male staff. But don't worry, it was only the young ones.
As soon as you start saying candy and little kids, I'm like,
Yeah, that's what I was like, elementary school, dun dun dun. Introducing David Brooks, a 12-year-old that he would befriend. Corll became a sort of father figure after his parents divorced and his dad moved away. They would go to the beach together with other kids, and when David needed money, he would need only ask and Dean would help him out. Sounds too good to be true. And that's because it was. David was being groomed by Dean in a sexual relationship, which started, I guess, in 1969, and would end up involving some of the local youth who he would bribe with money or candy. Turns out old Deanie boy was a great big pedo. And I mean, if you hadn't picked up on that by now, Jesus Christ. On a cracker.
with some candy.
Actually. Great big pedo, great big pedo.
Oh, I don't like it.
Neither. That's why we talk about it.
Together.
It's like I trap you in it.
Yeah. Oh, I don't like this story anymore.
I didn't like it from the start. David would also nab a Best Supporting Character role in a few of the atrocities that you will hear about today. In 1968, his mother sold the business and moved away. She would never see Dean again, though she would often talk to him on the phone. Look, I'm not too sure why, because they don't go into the information, but I think maybe she actually discovered that he was, one, gay, which would have been, in the 60s, that would have been quite...
homosexual.
And then two, that he had a certain penchant for younger people.
Because why would you just never see a kid again?
You obviously haven't had a Dean Corll. Corll ended up becoming an electrician. The strangest thing, at least to me, is that aside from the grooming, inappropriate sexual interactions with David and obviously the flirting with young boys, his rap sheet only dated between 1970 and 1973, but good golly Miss Molly did he make the most of those 3 years. I'm going to go through the victims in chronological order, but I'm not going to go into full detail of what took place.
Thank you.
Because they're usually quite graphic, and I just don't want to do that today.
You don't have to, because it's your podcast.
That's right, it's my episode. I will also say a big part of that is to go into each and every one of these victims individually for what happened. We would be here for a very long time.
No, thank you.
So I thought we'd just go into basic details.
And I appreciate you for that.
Well, thanks. Appreciate you too. September 25th of 1970, Jeffrey Conant, 18, a student of the University of Texas, was abducted while hitchhiking from Austin. He was buried at the High Island Beach. December 15th of that same year, Denny Yates and James Glass, 14, lured from an evangelical rally by David, where they were strangled and buried in Corll's boat shed. January 30th, 1971, Donald Waldrop, 15, vanished on his way to visit a bowling alley. According to Brooks, Donald's father was a builder who was working on an apartment next to Corll's house at the time that Donald was murdered. That same day, Jerry Waldrop, Donald's brother, 13, the youngest of Corll's victims, was strangled with his brother and buried in the boat shed also. March 9th of that same year, Randall Harvey, 15, disappeared on his way home from his job as a gas station attendant. He was shot in the head and buried in Corll's boat shed. His remains weren't identified until 2008. Long time. May 29th of that same year, David Hilligast, 13, was last seen along his friend Gregory Mellywinkle while climbing into a white van. That same day, Gregory Mellywinkle, 16, a former employee of Corll's Candy Company and boyfriend of Randall Harvey's sister, he disappeared on his way to visit a local swimming pool. August 17th of that same year, Reuben Watson, 17, left his home to visit a cinema. Watson later called his mother to tell her he was spending the evening with Brooks. He was gagged, strangled, and buried in Corll's boat shed. February 9th, 1972, Willard Branch Jr., 17, who was the son of the Houston police officer. That officer died during the search for his son of a heart attack.
Oh, that's so sad.
That's really sad. Willard had been castrated before he was shot and buried in Corll's boat shed. His remains weren't identified until 1985. March 24th, Frank Aguirre, 18, was strangled and buried at High Island Beach.
How many fucking people?
We'll get there. April 20th of that same year, Mark Scott, 17, a friend of Brooks, was killed at Corll's Schuyler Street address. Scott was strangled and buried at High Island, although his remains have yet to be found. So that one was more of a confession than a discovery. May 21st of that same year, Johnny DeLone, 16, a Heights youth who was last seen with his friend walking to a local store. He was shot in the head and then strangled. May 21st, the same day, Billy Bulch, 17, a former employee of Corll's Candy Company, was strangled and buried at High Island Beach. July 20th of that same year, Stephen Sickman, 17, was last seen leaving a party held in the Heights. He suffered several fractured ribs before he was strangled by a nylon cord and buried in the boat shed. His remains were identified in April of 2011. October 3rd of that same year, Wally J. Simino, 14, was abducted while walking to Hamilton Junior High School. Simino attempted to call his mother at Corll's residence before the phone was disconnected. He was strangled and buried in Corll's boat shed. October 3rd of that same year, Richard Hembry, 13, was last seen alongside his friend in a white van parked outside a Heights grocery store. He was shot in the mouth and strangled at Corll's Westcott Towers address. November 12th of that same year, Richard Kepner, 19, vanished on his way to call his fiancée from a payphone. He was strangled and buried at High Island Beach. His remains were identified in September of 1983. February 1st of 1973, Joseph Lyles, 17, an acquaintance of Corll who lived on the same street as Brooks, was last seen by Brooks to be grabbed by Corll at Wirt Road and was subsequently buried at Jefferson County Beach. June 4th of that same year, Billy Ray Lawrence, 15, who phoned his father to ask if he could go fishing with some friends, was kept alive by Corll for 4 days. He was killed and buried at Lake Sam Rayburn. June 15th of that same year, Ray Blackburn, 20, a married man from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, vanished while hitchhiking from the Heights to see his newborn child. He was strangled at Corll's Lamar Drive residence and buried out at Lake Sam Rayburn. July 7th of that same year, Homer Garcia, 15, was shot in the head and chest and buried at Lake Sam Rayburn. July 12th of that same year, John Sellers, 17, an orange youth, was killed 2 days before his 18th birthday. Sellers was shot in the chest and buried at High Island Beach. He was the only victim to be buried fully clothed. July 19th of that same year, Michael Tony Bulch, 15, the older brother of Billy Bulch, a victim of Corll's from the previous year. He was strangled and buried at Lake Sam Rayburn. Imagine both of your sons on different years being abducted and murdered. I can't even fathom one. July 25th of that same year, Marty Jones, 18. He was last seen with his friend and flatmate Charles Cobble walking towards Corll's apartment. July 25th, obviously the same day of that same year, Charles Carrie Cobble, 17, who was married with the pregnant wife at the time of his murder. He was shot twice in the head and found in the boat shed. That rhymed. I don't like that. August 3rd of that same year, James Dremala, 13, was last seen riding his bike in South Houston. He last called his parents to tell them that he was at a party across town. Those are the murders. We're not done. Well,
I'm like, get first.
Earlier, we learned of Brooks's involvement with Corll in not only being a friend, but also procuring a lot of his victims, and I believe participating to some degree in some of the atrocities that happened thereafter. But he also introduced somebody by the name of Alma Henley to Corll, someone who was supposed to be a victim, but instead was convinced to become an accomplice. According to an interview Henley did in 2010, he claimed he didn't know Corll's true intentions and had on one occasion even tried to talk him out of it. His convictions must not have been that strong though, because he decided to actively participate. It all fell apart with what was to be their last intended victim on August 7th, 1973. Henley set his eyes on Timothy Cordell, 19, and asked him to hang out. They sat around huffing paint fumes and drinking until midnight at Corll's house. Leaving together for some undisclosed reason, the two drove towards and parked near Henley's home, where they heard a commotion coming from across the street. Rhonda Williams, 15, limped out of her house nursing a sprained ankle after being beaten up by her father. She was distraught and didn't want to return home, so the two invited her to go back with them to Corll's house. No. The three arrived back at Corll's house at approximately 3 a.m. Corll was livid that Henley would dare bring a girl back to his house, telling him in private that he had ruined everything. After hearing of her harrowing night with her father, being the good sport that he was, Corll decided to calm down and ply the three with beer and marijuana. Intently watching the three until they all passed out. Henley would wake up, however, finding himself face down with his mouth taped shut, and Corll standing over him, putting him in handcuffs. His ankles were also bound together. Williams and Carey were both lying face down next to Henley with their mouths also taped, and they were securely bound by nylon rope. The only difference being that Carey had been stripped naked, because Carey was the boy in the matter. When Corll noticed that Henley had woken up, he removed the tape from his mouth. Henley told him to stop and protested against what he was sure was soon to come, but Corll reiterated that he was angry at Henley for bringing a girl to his house, and that he was going to kill all three after he had sexually assaulted and tortured Carey. He told Henley, "Man, you blew it bringing a girl." Then he shouted, "I'm gonna kill you all, but first I'm gonna have my fun." Fee-fi-fo-fum. But he was gay, so maybe it didn't sound like that. "Man, you blew it bringing a girl to my house. I'm gonna kill you all, but first I'm gonna have my fun."
It's a bit extreme, right? Bring a vagina into the house. I'm gonna kill you all.
Apparently, he kicked the 15-year-old girl in the chest repeatedly before dragging Henley into the kitchen, where he placed a .22 caliber pistol against his stomach, taunting and threatening to shoot him. Henley, desperate to live, convinced Corll to release him after a 30-minute conversation where he promised to participate in the torture and murder of both Carey and Williams. Henley then carried both Carey and Williams into the bedroom, where he would tie them both to opposite sides of Corll's torture board. Yes, this man had a torture board. I saw a photo of it. It was not nice. Carey on his stomach and Williams on her back. Henley was handed a hunting knife and was instructed to cut away Williams' clothes. Corll's plans would be for Henley to rape and kill Williams while he did the same to Carey at the same time, so they could do it together, watching each other like the twisted pervert he was. Okay, stop. The assault began on Carly as Henley was cutting off William's clothes. Both of them are awake by this point. She moved her head to see what was happening, and her tape had come loose, so she asked Henley, "Is this for real?" As in, like, is this really happening? To which he responded yes, and then she asked him if he was going to do anything about it. Because remember, the three of these people are friends, so that must be such a surreal...
Yeah. So you were the go die, bitch. Really? Or really? Are we doing this?
Is this for real?
Are we doing this?
What the fuck?
Yeah, I can't...
Henley asked if he could take Williams into another room, but he was ignored. At this point, he allegedly grabbed Corll's pistol and shouted, "You've gone far enough, Dean." Corll clambered off Carly, and Henley continued, "It can't go on any longer. I can't have you kill all my friends." Corll yelled, "Kill me, Wayne!" And Henley stepped back. Corll advanced closer and yelled, "You won't do it." Henley pulled the trigger, shooting Corll in the forehead. This didn't kill him because it didn't penetrate his skull, so he kept on advancing on Henley, who shot him 2 more times in the left shoulder. Corll turned and ran out of the room and into a wall where he was shot another 3 times in the lower back and shoulder. Corll died where he lay. Why are you laughing? You read to all?
Just like, he just got shot in the forehead and it's like, and he ran neck hard into the wall.
Henley would later recall that the sole thought in his mind in the moments immediately thereafter were that Corll would have been proud of the way that he had behaved during the confrontation, adding that he had been training him to react quickly and forcibly, and that this was exactly what he had done. I know, your face says it all. They eventually agreed to contact the police to report the murder and the events that took place that evening. Originally, Henley just wanted the 3 of them to get out of there and just leave it for whatever it was, but they convinced him to call them. As Corll was never charged or convicted, he never went to trial for his crimes. So other than what we have been told, we will never actually know how many people were murdered by or in connection to Corll. They believe there are at least 28 victims, but suspect that there were much more. The aforementioned murders all took place within 3 years. Interesting little side note. There is a documentary streaming at the moment about Dean Corll and John Wayne Gacy called The Clown and the Candyman. I haven't seen it yet, but it is a 4-part series where they talk about how the two are linked in some way. As they lived entirely in different parts of the country, I'm not quite sure how that works, but my conclusion from the synopsis is that they are both part of a big pedophile ring, so they probably would have crossed paths at some point. I don't know, the whole thing's fucking gross. I get it. But that brings me to the end of today's episode. So
what a wild fucking ride. I
Yeah.
did not want to be dragged along there. Thank you.
you're welcome. Thoughts?
That's fucked.
Yeah.
I've got nothing. I got nothing. That's
Yeah.
fucked.
You were quiet through most of that.
Yeah.
But I didn't go into detail really until the end part where you kind of needed that detail for how it all ended. But that felt like something out of a movie.
Yeah, it just doesn't, yeah.
You've gone far enough, Dean. You won't shoot me. Try me, bitch.
Well, shit. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.